thank you to everyone that's attending today's webinar. We have close to 1,000 registered to attend today's sessions, totaling this morning and this afternoon. So before I let you go, I want to thank you for allowing me a couple minutes to speak to you. Last year was especially difficult for everyone. I want to again commend everyone on how you handled yourself and how you handled the operation of your office and staff. It's been recognized across the state and across the nation of how well Indiana and local government operated in the face of tremendous challenges. So, job well done to everyone. One of the many things that we learned from last year as it relates to budget prep and the adoption process, it is that preparation was the key to success last year. And if you received my weekly email, I emphasized that point this week. I encourage you to take that to heart. You're going to see from today's session not only how DLGF prepares for the volume of information that we need to bring to the table, but also the information that you need to bring, or that we both need to bring and compile to the virtual teams budget workshops. Our goal is to make sure you understand both the process and the proper timing of the budget process. DLGF never wants to have to continue a unit's budget due to the unit not adopting properly or timely. It's the last thing we want to have happen. So please prepare now to succeed in the future. And it's the culmination of doing the little things well that will lead to a successful budget adoption. There's a lot of questions out there about ARP, so I would refer you to the U.S. Treasury website. My weekly email had several links of resources available, and I know that your respective associations have been flooding their websites with links and information about ARP and answer your questions. So again, before I turn it back over to Fred and Jenny, I want to say how well done this morning's session was completed and how well received it was by those in the audience. I want to thank Fred and Jenny for an outstanding session this morning, and I know you'll enjoy the one this afternoon, believe it or not. So Jenny, Fred, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you all very much.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fred Van Dorp, and I'm the BUDS Division Director with the Department of Local Government Finance. Today, we'll be having our second session of the department's ongoing webinar series, this one covering budget workshops, the overview, and the preparation. We'll try to keep this to just about 60 minutes. I like to think of July 1st as the unofficial start of the budgeting season, but before we get to that unofficial start, I think the webinar series, the conversations you're having locally, and the conversations you're having with the department are extremely important step to preparing for the upcoming cycle. About a month ago, we had the first in our webinar series. This one focused on, or that one focused on, the circuit breaker, or the concept surrounding circuit breaker, starting all the way down at the individual tax bill level and working our way up through how the circuit breaker will, or the property, also known as the property tax caps, impact local government. I hope that presentation was informative, just to help clarify how this process works. I bring it up today to say that presentation definitely felt inclusive. Whether you were the largest county in Indiana or you were the smallest township, these concepts, or a new official or a veteran of the process, or even an individual taxpayer, hopefully listening to that presentation will help sort of clarify how the process works. I bring that up to contrast it to today's presentation. We've got a lot of material to cover, and we're gonna jump right in. Just know that as we're covering workshops, we're gonna make reference to forms and formats and websites and documentation that are each worthy of their own presentation. We're going to cover a lot of material, and so we're going to reference these documents. We're not necessarily going to do a deep dive into each one of those. What I hope comes out of the present today is that it sort of sparks the conversations between local government and the department, or more specifically between local government and the DLGF's field representatives. If you've got questions about anything that you hear today or need clarification on anything that's being requested, your DLGF field representative would be a fantastic starting point for any questions that you would have. Between this morning's presentation and this afternoon's version, the field reps are listening to the presentation the same way that you are. So they are hearing what I am instructing you and hearing that I am promising that if you've got questions, they would be the individuals who can answer it. Okay. With that said, let's jump right in. This is usually my favorite slide in any presentation that we give. In 4 simple questions, it's going to try to outline what we're going to cover over the next 50 slides. The goal here is that we're going to define or just give you a short explanation of what a DLGF summer budget workshop is. Start to outline how both the department and how units will prepare for those workshops. We'll get into details about what happens at the workshop, and as important as the first 3 bullets, spend some time talking about what happens after the workshop. The target audience for this webinar would be any non-school unit that is planning on or may plan on attending a DLGF workshop. Now, if you are part of a school corporation or part of a unit that doesn't generally attend a workshop, before you log off, let me make a case that it's still beneficial to stick around. For the maybe larger units that aren't planning on attending a workshop, we're going to cover we'll cover briefly the Form 1, the Form 2, the Form 4. The department will be sharing some best practices for how to put those forms together. Also, even if you're not attending a workshop, there are some of the topics or some of the information that still needs to be prepared and submitted to the department. It's an interesting perspective on how the department recommends units go through the pre-budgeting sort of processes, what they need to be putting together, what they should be considering even as early as May. For school corporations, know that we are developing a school-centric version of this presentation that will be available through our website, and that during the workshop season, while you don't attend a traditional workshop, we'll still be carving out the time to have the Q&A sessions on the school-centric pieces of budgeting. We'll still be offering those again this year. Okay. So with that said, let's get to the first question that we're sort of seeking to answer, and that is, what is a DLGF summer budget workshop? In its purest form, it is a free and voluntary one-on-one meeting with a local unit and the department's field representative. Now, in this case, when we say one-on-one, we're talking about one unit for the department. If the elected official or members of their staff want to attend, it doesn't have to just be sort of one person attending. It's not going to be done in a format like this. We'll really be engaging one unit at a time to make sure we understand your budgeting priorities during the upcoming year. The sessions themselves are capped at up to 45 minutes. We'll see later on in the presentation that some will go shorter than that one, but each one we're going to try to cap at that 45-minute mark. Now, the workshops are scheduled between July 19th and August 31st, and we'll take a moment to talk about the importance of those 2 dates. So, in order to have a successful workshop, there are pieces of information that won't be ready until the end of June or the beginning of July, and a couple easy examples there is if we're interested in what your June 30th cash balances are, and we'll talk about that total at length throughout the presentation. It's important that June 30th has come and gone. It's important that we know what your June or your spring settlement distributions are. And those are totals that won't be available until for another couple of weeks. And there's a big one here of the max levy growth quotient, right? We know that that's an important tool that we use for a number of calculations. These are all values that are available towards the end of June or at the beginning of July. So part of the reason why we don't start workshops earlier is we want to make sure we have all the information we need that we want to make sure both of our groups, both the department and local government, has access to all the information that could ultimately factor into the decisions that we're making from a budgeting perspective. Now, the August 31st date there's some significance to that one also. Now, the goal here is that we're able to interact with the local government, have enough information that we can present to you everything that you'll need to make decisions for your upcoming budget. We want to make sure that we're introducing those pieces of information to you or giving you an opportunity to meet with the department early enough in the cycle that you can still complete the other steps, have the meetings, collect any other pieces of information, have those conversations locally. By setting our cutoff date at August 31st, we're going to make sure that we've given you an opportunity to meet with us before we turn you loose locally to finish the rest of the budgeting cycle. With the fourth bullet is going to be the first, but not the only time throughout the presentation that you'll see bullets that are either bolded or in highlight. In this case, we've got both. And so for 2021, just like 2020, the department will be conducting its summer workshops virtually using the Microsoft Teams platform. This was something that we started last year and something that the department has been reaching out to make sure that there were just no surprises as we continue down that path for the upcoming cycle. Now, there are a number of online platforms for online virtual platforms. Teams is the one that the department uses. Now, we learned last year that this is a way that we can still share the information. We can still engage with local government to collect the information we need and to present the information that we need to without until it's safe to go back to being face to face. You know, one of the things that we learned last year is that local government, the officials on your end, you don't necessarily need a camera in order to participate in these. While it's always good to be able to see the faces of the individuals that we're talking to electronically, we know that Teams gives us the ability to share our information, but help you not just talk you through the navigation, but be able to show you where you can find the various resources. So during the preseason, or for the last 6 months or last 5 months, the field reps have been reaching out, scheduling optional meetings, which also included an option to meet with the department through Teams, so that we get a chance to familiarize ourselves both on your end and our end of how the Teams works, what their options are. Just sometimes as easy as what buttons to press so that you can share your screen so that you can see what it is that we're seeing. All right, last thing that Teams gives us is, even if you don't have a computer, Teams also comes, or the version of Teams that we're using also comes with a conference call number. So we've got a way to make sure that anybody who needs to participate, whether it be through the computer or whether just through calling into it, we've got a single tool that we're going to be using for all virtual workshops this upcoming cycle. So when we're at a workshop, there are a number of things that we can discuss relating to the questions about the budget cycle or the budget procedures. You know, it gives us an opportunity to review your proposed timeline for your advertising, for your public hearing, or for your adoption meetings. It's an opportunity for the department and the unit to work together to make sure that you have the security and gateway, and that you understand the navigation or the submission procedures, just so that we can get through the electronic part of the budget filing. Number 3 is a good one. It's a chance for us to show you what type of resources we make available to you, the various reports, either through the public side of Gateway or through the login side of Gateway or through the department's website. We can use the workshops as an opportunity to show you what's available for you. Number 4, and this one's a big one. Whether you're going through your 4th or your 40th budgeting cycle, you're aware that each year there's new legislation that changes the process slightly. If there are any schools listening, we know we're talking about the new procedures for submitting the bus replacement and the capital projects plan. If there are any townships listening, I mean, this is where we can discuss how the capital improvement plan last year needed to be completed, filed, and then submitted to the department. So the workshop is one chance for us to have a discussion about any legislative changes that could slightly alter or significantly alter the process from last year. Yeah, I may have buried the lead on this one because number 5 is the big one. The DLGF Summer Budget Workshop is an opportunity for local government to receive assistance with preparing or reviewing, or the big one of uploading some of the budget forms into Gateway. And so that's when we're looking at the workshops, these are some of the things that we can do when we get together this in July and August. Now, if we're going to talk about what workshops are, there's a couple things that we need to discuss in terms of what workshops can be. And then for the next 2 slides, what I want to cover are some of the limitations when it comes to workshops. The first one is not unique to workshops, but it's always worth mentioning that the department cannot provide legal or financial advice. It is a bright line. It is a very bright line. When we're talking about budgeting, we are talking about the budgets that are compiled, advertised, and adopted by the local elected officials. There will be times during the year, and there will be times at budget workshops where you are asking valid and important questions, but that if they cross into the department providing you either legal or financial advice, we will end up routing you to another resource that is better equipped in answering those type of questions. And sometimes you'll ask and we'll end up telling you that you need to contact your county attorney, or there are some local decisions that are best answered by your county auditor or your financial advisor or your city or county council, various local government associations. There's a chance that these are questions that need to be posed to the departments that you manage, or other state agencies like the state auditor's office or even state board of accounts. So the other pair of limitations that we should take a look at when we talk about workshops. Number 2, with the limited number of time available for appointments, units must prepare their budget information, or must prepare some of their budget information before they come to the workshops. And this is the point of the presentation. We are going to spend maybe 20 or 25 minutes looking in detail at what it means to prepare for the workshops. 45 minutes is not a lot of time unless you are, 45 minutes is not a lot of time to make sure that, and in order to make sure that these workshops are as beneficial to you as they can be, it's important that we know that before coming to attend them, there are some expectations that the department has of how you prepared for that meeting. Okay. On the other side of that coin, while workshops represent a way to get off to a quick start, a way to get a lot of information from the department in a very short window, it does not represent the entire budgeting process. We'll touch on this throughout the presentation, but if you attend the workshop, even if you get an upload from the department, there will be dozens of additional steps, both within Gateway and locally, that you will need to complete in order to ultimately submit a budget to the department in order for it to be certified. So those are 2 very important limitations when we talk about there's some work that needs to be done before you come to a workshop, and then even after you've done a workshop, there's still a lot of budgeting left that needs to be done before we're going to be through the process. Nope. That feels like the transition we were hoping for getting into. So how do we prepare for workshops? Yeah, looking at 2,000 workshops in a 45-day time period between July 19th and August 31st. As Wes said in the introduction, preparation is essential for making sure that we can cover all the things that we need to in that allotted time period. What we're going to look at is the next couple slides of what do we mean by preparation. So preparation is a 2-way street. So let's start with talking about what the department's going to do to prepare for any workshop that you'll be attending. We compile a not insignificant amount of statewide source material, including but not limited to pulling down all of your prior year budget information at the unit level, at the fund level. As you went through the certification last year, or as your predecessors went through the certification period last year, we have the final values, the funds, the rates, the dates, everything that they used last year, everything that they submitted, we'll have access to. So whether you are interested in what you did in the prior year or interested in what your predecessor did, whether we are sharing information on reports like the 1782, or directing you to where you can find your budget order, or directing you within Gateway that you can see what was advertised and what was adopted throughout the process. Going into workshops, the department's going to make sure that we have all that information ready and accessible. Additionally, internally, we keep a list of questions that we have received from units, challenges that units have gone through in the upcoming year, and so There are times where we will be able to follow up on longstanding issues that may have existed within your unit. The budget division is still has more than 200 years of budgeting experience, and so there's a chance that your field rep will be able to discuss what some of the decisions that had been made by your predecessor, or in some cases even your predecessor's predecessor. We will have that ready for you. If you choose to attend a workshop, we'll have that information waiting for you. Now, we are still working through the process of finalizing it, but we will be discussing at great length the legislative updates with the field reps. And while we'll be releasing a series of memos to accompany any of the changes that we're seeing, we're going to spend the next 2 months making sure that the field reps are as comfortable with that information as well. So that if you've got a question about a particular piece of legislation, your field rep will have discussed it and will be able to take you through the impact that it could have on your upcoming cycle. Last but not least, we'll also be sitting down with you with a generalized budget calendar. It's another way of saying the statutory last action dates. We'll be able to share with you the last date that you can advertise for a public hearing, the last day that you can have a public hearing, the last day you can have an adoption meeting, the deadline for submitting all of your budget information. We'll be able to sit down with you so that we can take you through some of the most important statewide deadlines for your units. More specifically, we will also have completed and calculated various financial reports, like the estimated maximum levy report, or the department's calculation of the maximum amount of property taxes you'll be able to levy for in the upcoming year. Number two, we know that about a month ago, the state calculated and posted the actual 2021 circuit breaker reports. When you sit down for a workshop, we will have the 2022 or next year's estimates ready. Relating to that one, we'll also have the non-property tax revenue estimates. That's the miscellaneous revenue report. The department will use as much historical information as we can access to estimate how much of a motor vehicle highway distribution you're going to receive in the upcoming year, or the local road and street distribution, the cigarette tax, excise, the CVET, the financial institutions, or the FIT tax. We will have a unit specific report available for you with our estimates for the upcoming year. Now, we know that with both the circuit breaker report and the non-property tax revenue estimates, you're not required to use our values, but we will have an estimate available to you, along with an explanation of how we came up with that estimate. Ultimately, it'll still fall to the unit to make the determination of whether or not they want to use a higher number or a lower number, but we'll make sure that we have an opening estimate for you that you can consider. So, for some units with for units that have accumulative funds, we will have the cumulative fund maximum rates. Before we even start the budgeting process, we'll be able to provide you with a report that shows the maximum rate that we'll be able to certify for your cum funds. And last but not least, for any libraries that are intending, once we have the max levy growth quotient, we'll be able to calculate the maximum non-binding budget that you'll be able to adopt. So on our end, this is some of the things that we put together before the workshops and that we make sure that we have available to you and some of the information that we need to put together before we start our workshops on that July 19th date. But preparation is a two-way street. So if that's what the department is doing to prepare for workshops, what we're looking at on the screen now is a listing of 7 items that represent the minimum level of the minimum preparation that we would request any unit who's going to attend a workshop would complete. We've got them listed out here as 7 individuals. We're going to spend the next maybe 10 or 15 minutes going through each of these spend the next 15 minutes looking at these individually. The first one on the list is as important as anything that we're going to talk about today. If we're talking about the workshops, if we're talking about what we need to start the process off, a prepared report from your financial software or from your ledger book showing the total expenditures, the total receipts, and the June 30th cash balance for all funds that you plan on budgeting for. Now, what we're looking at here is We need all the activity that has taken place from January 1 through January, from January 1st through June 30th. When we talk about budgeting, we're talking about an 18-month window of activity, both revenue and expenditures. But we build that framework. We build all of those calculations off of that June 30th cash balance. If we think the cash balance is $1,000, but it is really $1 million, there's a chance that we're going to understate your spending ability during the budgeting season. The reverse the reverse case is just as problematic. If we think that your cash balance is $1 million, but it's actually only 1,000, there's a chance we could overstate your spending ability in the upcoming year. If we're going to build the budget, what we need is specific information relating to your cash balance from June 30th, the financial report or the ledger book containing all the information we need. That's our cornerstone. Relating to that, if you are a unit that has any investments, that would also be included in the June 30th cash balance. What we'd be requesting in those cases would be any information you have relating to those investments or any supporting documentation to any relevant supporting documentation. Now, the department wants to be as flexible as possible. We know that units, there are more than one way to satisfy this particular requirement. And so what we're looking at on this slide are two different examples of fund reports that would more than meet what it is that we're looking for. On the right-hand side, we're looking at just a ledger book that is kept by hand. It's identifying a specific fund. It's identifying the disbursements. We have got in the bottom right-hand corner in the blue, we can see what the cash balance is as of June 30th. This absolutely meets any of the requirements that we would need. This would be as long as it's legible, we would have everything we need in order to build the budget from here. At the bottom, we've got an electronic version of the same report. Again, a listing of each of the funds that we see in that first column. We've got the dispersed year-to-date totals. We've got the current cash balance for each of the funds. Whether you have a handwritten ledger or whether you have a system-generated report, this is ultimately what we would be looking for to meet this requirement. Number two, one of the other things we'll need to make sure that we have an accurate picture of your finances is a listing of all the encumbrances. Just like with the fund report, we're looking at the encumbrances listed by fund and any relevant supporting documentation that we'll need to review to confirm the encumbrance. The department would also double down on the idea that what we're talking about here are only the formally encumbered amounts from the prior year budgeting cycle. If you didn't go through the formal encumbrance process, those values should not be included on any report listing the encumbrances for a particular fund. Number three, and this is a big one, if you are a unit that has debt, the department will need to collect the original lender-generated amortization schedule that was provided for that debt repayment. Now, we can see there's more highlighting and more bold on this page. Now, oftentimes this request a unit will provide the department a download from the amortization schedule that's in debt management, and it's not exactly what we're looking for. We know that every time that there's a debt issue, the unit will take the amortization schedule provided by the lender and enter that information into debt management. We know that's one of the required steps, and units are doing well to meet that requirement. For this one, the reason why we're so interested in the lender-generated original amortization schedule is we are going to use that original to validate the data entry that you did into debt management. So hypothetically, if you meant to reference that there was a $10,000 payment, but you accidentally miskeyed it and there was only a $1,000 payment, the original amortization schedule will demonstrate that to the department. Otherwise, there's a chance that the levy that we would end up giving you would not satisfy the payment that you're ultimately having. So For the units that have debt funds, even though you have entered a lot of this information in debt management, what we're looking for is the original amortization schedule that we can use to reconcile against what's in debt management. Now, the field reps have been reaching out since January to collect this information. So for many units, we already have that file on hand. What I wanted to do on this slide was really give you an explanation of why it is we differentiate between the original amortization schedule and why we don't just pull that information directly from debt management. Okay. Number 4, before we look at meeting for workshops, this slide really covers two related topics, two sort of interrelated topics when it comes to additional appropriations. On one hand, if you have done any additional appropriations so far this year, but you have not entered those additional appropriations into the application in Gateway, this would be a request, or this would be the follow request to make sure all of that information is entered into Gateway. If you're entering it into Gateway, it's information the department can pull together and that the field reps can bring to the workshop. What's stated on the slide would be if you are aware of additional appropriations that will be done from July through the end of the year, if you are aware of any that you're considering or thinking about doing, what we're looking at doing is asking you to provide us a listing of expected additional appropriations. So ones you've done so far, you've already had a chance to enter, but if locally you're looking at doing an additional appropriation in the general fund in October and November, we're interested in a listing of any of the additional appropriations that are being considered. It will help us to more effectively take you through the rest of the budgeting process if we have an idea of these future additionals. Number 5, what we're looking for in this one is a completed Form 1. The Form 1, when the department talks about budgeting, we've got a pretty specific definition. And while this is worthy of its own presentation, I want to make sure that I wanted to make sure that I cover a couple points here. When the department talks about your certified budget or your certified appropriation, what we're referring to is the intersection between what you advertised and what you adopted and the revenue that you've reported that lets us know how much you can afford to spend during the course of the year. That's what we mean when we're talking about the appropriation. That's what we mean when we're talking about the budget. The Form 1 sometimes feels like a budget in and of itself. That is the form that's going to represent all of the line item expenditures that you're planning on, everything that you're planning on buying, every salary, every office supply, every capital outlay exists on the Form 1. And so when we talk about budgeting, we're talking about that intersection. When we're talking about a listing of all expenditures, how much you plan on buying during the budget year, everything you plan on paying for, that's what goes into the Form 1. And so the request before attending a budget workshop is that the local unit has taken the time to list out all of those expenditures. Now, the department is not requiring units to use any specific level of detail. If you want to go down to the individual or you want to summarize it, all of that is a local decision. But what we're asking is that not only would you have compiled a listing of all the expenditures you plan on making during the budgeting cycle, but that you have also loaded that information, either manually or through upload, but that you have loaded all of that information into into Gateway. So we're looking at a completed, or the data entry being completed for the Form 1. Now, to make that process a little bit easier, when we make the budget application available, we're going to roll over the line items from last year. So you'll have the same lines available that you created last year. You'll just be populating the values. Now, it's true on all the line items except for the capital outlay. So for this request, we're asking you to consider what it is that you plan on buying during the upcoming year. That helps the department during the workshops to start to make that, to try to identify that intersection of if that's what you plan on buying. We spend the rest of the time reviewing what type of revenues that you'll have that are going to support that sort of level of spending. As you are completing that Form 1, the department has some best practices that we would absolutely recommend. And the first one is the easy one. Each year, we know the Form 1 is one of the documents that needs to be created. So as we are looking at creating a Form 1 for 2022, well, we can use the the Form 1 that was created in 2021 as our guideline. What were the things that were anticipated as being expenditures for the upcoming year? Now, after using last year's Form 1 as a starting point, there's two things that we can do with that. One, we can compare what our actual expenses are so far this year against what it is that we've budgeted. We are 5.5 months through the year. Is this the type of fund where, so if we budgeted $1,000 for office supplies and 5 months in we've spent $500 in office supplies, feels like we are spending in a manner that's consistent with what we expected. Now, same idea, if we spend $5,000 in office supplies against a budget of $1, should there be a conversation locally of, are we budgeting enough for this particular expenditure? Also, so using last year as a starting point, but then we start to compare what we've been doing so far this year to figure out what we did last year. Does it effectively represent what our expenditures look like? Now, that is a extremely complicated process, but it is a way to refine the estimates that we end up using each year. Now, number two on this one is comparing the actual expenditures to how much revenue was available. In that same example, if we thought that we had enough revenue to support $1,000 worth of expenditures, but it turned out we had $10,000 worth of revenue, maybe there were more expenditures that we could have considered. So when looking at the Form 1, the prior year is a good place to start, but we can compare what has actually happened to what we thought was going to happen, and we can compare what our funding was to what we thought our funding would be to what our funding is, to give us a better sense of whether or not the 2022 Form 1 would need to be adjusted. If the Form 1 is the expenditures, the Form 2 is representing the revenues, or more specifically, all revenues other than property tax. Now, if the request was that the Form 1 was completed and entered into Gateway, for this form, what we're asking you is not to complete it as much as to identify what you think your non-property tax revenue is going to be during the upcoming year, starting to collect those values, figuring out if you are going to have access to the same types of miscellaneous revenue as you did in the prior year, and how much you expect to collect for the 18 months of the budgeting cycle. So how much do you think you're going to collect from July 1 through December 31st of this year, and how much you think you're going to collect in the full 12-month period from January 1st to December 31st of the next year. Similar to the Form 1, if we're looking for an idea of how to best get this started, we can use the prior year's Form 2 as a starting point. Which revenue sources, which non-property tax revenue sources did we have access to last year? Once we have an idea of what was included in that list, we can, similar to the Form 1, we can reconcile what we thought was going to happen to what we've so far collected during the course of the year. Start to give us a sense of whether or not our estimates from last year were too high, whether or not our estimates from last year were too low, or whether or not they were just right, and that we've got an effective way of working on those estimates. Additionally, if we're talking about best practices for the Form 2, the department would encourage you to take a look at the report that we have put online, or that we will put online between July 1st and July 19th. Included in our miscellaneous revenue report will be an explanation of how we came up with our estimate. Now, in both cases, we're trying to estimate activity that is 18 months away, and it is definitely a challenge. But the department will provide a report that'll tell you how we think it's going to work. We know that the important part is what actually occurs, but we can give you a starting point for what we think the activity is going to be. Now, the last one on this particular slide talks about considering the impact of budgeting or estimating too high versus too low. If you estimate that you're going to have $1 million of this non-property tax revenue, the department can approve up to a higher level of spending. If revenue comes in underneath those totals, it potentially means that the budget that the department certified is unfunded or is not funded at the level we thought it would be. Now, there are some ramifications for that one, where there's some sort of local controls in place for when that occurs. On the opposite side, If you estimate too low, we could be understating how much revenue you'll have access to. We may artificially suppress the budget that we can ultimately end up certifying for the unit. And again, there are some local controls as to how you can change your appropriation if there's more revenue that comes in. Long story short, what we're looking at here is just know that when we're talking about estimates, we're talking about trying to estimate what's going to happen over the course of 18 months. If we're too high, there are some local decisions that need to be made. And if we're too low, there'll be some local decisions that need to be made. All right. Number 7, or the last one in this particular section, is before you come to a workshop, the department is going to ask you to consider setting preliminary budget hearing and set a preliminary budget hearing and adoption schedule. Now, what the preliminary schedule that you will be setting is not set in stone. There are absolutely mechanisms for changing both the public hearing and the adoption meeting that your field rep can talk to you about. But the reason why we are interested in having you bring that preliminary schedule to the department or to your workshop is so that we can take a look at it. If your plan is to have one adoption meeting but have one public hearing but have multiple adoption meetings, we can talk through, your field rep can talk you through the procedures around having multiple readings before adopting a budget. If we find out that you're planning on advertising on one day and then 3 days later adopting, we can have that discussion about the minimum amount of time necessary between your public hearing and your advertisement and your public hearing and your adoption meeting. If you are, hypothetically, if it were to come up that you're planning on advertising on December 1st and adopting on December 15th, we can talk to you about the statutory due dates and deadlines necessary for setting those meetings. Again, it's not the dates themselves that are most important to the department. It's just making sure that if there are any questions or any concerns or anything that we can identify that can potentially lead to an invalidly adopted budget, we want to be able to have that conversation in July, as compared to having much more difficult conversations later in the year. So when we used to meet face-to-face at these workshops, it was very easy for us to collect this information from you, right? We would just hand it across the table that we were meeting at. When meeting virtually, we still want to collect that information, or once that information is available, we still want access to it. What we're looking at on this slide is the navigation for where any files that you have prepared for your workshop can be sent to the department. This gives us a place that both groups will be able to access regardless of where we are. So on the screenshot on the left-hand side, we can see the submit signed form 4. That's where you'll submit your form 4 later in the cycle. But in this case, we're going to be using it more for the other documents. When you click that link, it'll take you to an option that looks similar to the picture on the right. You can select a file type so that you're going to be telling us that this is budget workshop data that you're sending in advance. You can enter a description like the June fund report so we know exactly what we're going to see when we open up that link. You'll upload that file directly into Gateway, and then the department will have access to it. With each field rep doing upwards of 200 plus workshops during the course of the year, or during the 45 days, during our 45 days, if we have time, we can start to review this information in advance. It gives us a chance to ask any follow-up questions relating to it, or send any clarifying of, well, this isn't exactly a report we're looking for, this is the one we need. So once you've started to compile your information, this is the place where you'll be able to submit it in Gateway so that we can take a look at it in advance. Ooh, okay, so we spent a lot of time talking about how to prepare, and now we finally arrived at what happens at these workshops. You know, we started off with a list before about various topics that we can cover, and I want to add to that list and really start to drill down to a couple of pretty specific things that can occur. One, you can work with your field rep through a number of the forms that are available. Number 2 is a very big one. Number 2 is a very big one. As time allows, and especially for the units where the workshop has gone very smoothly, we can spend time talking about how the updated template for the Form 4B can be used to evaluate your proposed budget. And we can use that Form 4B to understand whether or not your budget is fully funded or partially funded or underfunded. In English, what we're trying to convey there is we know that each year the department is looking for that intersection between what you plan on buying and what it is that you can afford. One of the things we can do at the workshops is show you how we make that determination, or give you very clear instruction that the budget that you are currently seeking will require the department to balance it, or the department may have to cut your budget unless there's additional information that be provided. That is very early into the process. We can have those discussions. The third one is the department is able to provide a checklist of a detailed walkthrough of all the steps that will need to be accomplished before the end of the budgeting cycle. So again, looking at some of the specific topics that we can have a conversation with. Now from here, I need to take a quick sidestep. In order to talk about what's going to occur at a workshop, we need to have a quick conversation about budget forms, or the information that is ultimately sent to the department so that we can certify the budget itself. Not the source material that's done for the workshops, but the actual forms themselves that are completed and sent to the department. As we referenced earlier, this is absolutely worthy of its own presentation. We can go an hour on most of these forms by themselves. I want to introduce them as concepts, but we'll turn it over to the individuals in the audience. If you've got more questions about these forms or what goes into them, where they can find it, that is a fantastic conversation to begin engaging with your field rep about. In Gateway, many of you will recognize the picture on the screen right now. That's the accordion menu. That's our splash page in the Gateway budget application. But annually, regardless of whether or not a unit ends up attending a workshop or not attending a workshop, the budget information that you are compiling will be worked into this format, or worked into the various forms that are presented on this menu and submitted to the department this way. Now, for the units that are attending a workshop, what the DLGF will be doing is playing a much more active role in that data entry process, in the process of getting many of these forms completed in Gateway. Now, this is our accordion menu, but the same information can be accessed, or we can lay it out differently in this upper right-hand corner by clicking this link of Budget Forms Flowchart. This is the same information we're looking at, it's just presented in a slightly different form. What this gives us is a different way to demonstrate the relationships between these forms, or more specifically, it gives us a chance to organize these forms into 3 distinct sections. The blue ones across the top represent our inputs. It's where the majority of the data entry is. The Form 4B, the one in the middle, we can see how our input forms all flow together to give us a single form where it presents every piece of information we have for each fund. Once the 4B is populated, or once some of the Form B is populated, we can see how that information is then distilled again to the Form 3 and the Form 4. The Form 3 being the notice to taxpayers, and the Form 4 being the actual form that your fiscal body will be adopting budgets on. Let's do a quick overview of each of those 3 sections. And so, like I said, worthy of its own presentation, but wanted to present the information this way so you can get a sense of, when we're talking about forms and we're talking about workshops, there's a reason why we can actively participate in some forms, but not others. Inputs, we're talking about that current year financial report. This is that report where we are going to try to derive the June 30th cash balance. What's important here is to note that even units that don't attend a workshop, in order to make sure we have that foundation, that cornerstone of the budgeting process, that June 30th cash balance, the current year financials still will represent that, and we'll still need to collect information from you in order to make sure we have the correct foundation in which to build the next 18 months of activity off of. The debt worksheet isn't applicable to all units, but that's where you're going to be selecting the timing of debt payments. That's where you'll be using the information in debt management to identify what the amount of levy that you'll need to repay any outstanding debt that you'll have. The Form 1 we talked about at length earlier, and that's organizing your ensuing year and expenses. This is all the activity you plan on. This is everything you plan on buying or everything you plan on paying for in the upcoming year. And then that Form 2, in order to figure out what your funding is going to be for that same 18-month period, we need to be aware of what non-property tax revenues are available to us. All of that information flows into the Form 4B. So in the 4B, it is a way that we can visualize whether or not your proposed budgets were going to be increasing, decreasing, or maintaining your existing cash reserves over the next 6-month period. Similarly, it also gives a chance to visualize whether or not your current spending and funding priorities will increase, decrease, or maintain your cash balances or your cash reserves over the next 18 months. Also gives us a very clear picture of if all the spending goes according to plan, if all the revenue comes in according to plan, it'll give us an idea of what your cash balance will be at the end of the next budgeting cycle. Now, once the 4B is created, we can use that to generate information that goes to the Form 3. Now that's going to list out when your public hearing is, where your public hearing is. It'll also list by fund, your proposed budgets and your proposed property tax levies for each of those funds. The other side of the coin, once we are closer to the end of the process, the Form 4 is what will actually be signed off on by your fiscal body. That's going to contain the budgets, that's going to contain the levies, and that's also going to include the tax rates for each of the funds that you're adopting a budget for. Okay, that is the speed. The speed that I went, the speed that I went through that in. Sorry, one moment. The speed that I went through that in doesn't convey the importance. Like I said, this is worthy of its own 60-minute presentation to talk about the flow of information through Gateway. What I wanted to do was introduce each one of those forms individually so that we can talk about this one. When we're talking about workshops, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Depending on what a unit needs, depending on what a unit wants, there are a number of different types of workshops that they may end up requesting from the department. What's not important on this slide are the names. So option A or B or C or D are not relevant. But what the option represents is, as the field reps begin scheduling workshops, they will be reaching out just to get a sense or an idea of what type of assistance you're ultimately asking for. Regardless of what you call it, it just gives us a sense of how we need to prepare for the workshop itself. The lowest option, or what option A is represented here, is very much just a conversation, right? Finding out about those legislative updates, finding out about any procedural changes the department is considering, collecting that information that we can use to validate the current year financial report. Sometimes that's all that occurs at a workshop. Other times, the unit's been doing this for a while. The only thing that they're requesting from a workshop is just reviewing the forms that they have so far put together, that current year financial, the Form 2, the Form 3, or the Form 4B. They just want the department to take a look, see if there's anything that's out of the ordinary on what they're currently planning. Option C, or the next level up, includes everything that we covered in option A, includes everything we covered in option B. But in these type of workshops, we're looking at actually assisting the unit to put those particular forms together. Starting with that same base information and actually helping them put together the current year financial, the 2, the 3, or the Form 4B. Option D is the majority of workshops that we do go all the way to option D. So again, starts with us having a conversation, leads to us collecting the information we need to validate the current year financial worksheet. but also includes a review of the forms, an assistant putting together the forms, and the big one, actually uploading the information from the current year financial and the Form 2 and the Form 3 and part of the Form 4B into Gateway for the unit. So again, it's important to know that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. As you are engaging with your field rep, they're going to start asking you questions to try to figure out which group they're going to ultimately put you into. The names aren't important. The level of assistance being required or what you hope to accomplish during the workshop is. Now, for those units that go through option D, there are a couple extremely important things we need to be clear on. When the department does an upload, we can consider that a erase and replace. Right? If we upload information for you, or if you request that we do an upload for you, and so as we covered in the prior slide, that is not required. If you have already entered the information, or if your financial advisor is going to put the information in the system, or if you just key the information in, you don't have to receive an upload. But if you request one, we are going to override everything that is currently in Gateway on the current year financial report, on the Form 2, on the Form 3, and on the Form 4B. So if that includes any home rule information that you could have entered. So again, the upload is not required, but know that if we go through the upload process, we are going to replace what is in the system with what we are working on putting together at the workshop. Now, if you are not seeking the upload option, that is more than okay. But if you do, it's just important to know what that means for any information that you have manually keyed in the Gateway. Now, I'll note here that the Form 1 is not a form that we upload, so there's no risk that the department's going to be overriding that one. Really, what we're looking at are the forms that we outlined on the prior slide: current year financial, 2, 3, and 4B. Okay. And so this brings us back to the picture that we started off with of, as we consider what forms we have the ability to assist with, or what forms we're going to be looking most closely at, we can see that we're largely focused on those inputs. That's where either we are requesting that you complete the Form 1 in advance, or we're going to be helping you to upload your information from the current year financial or the miscellaneous revenue report. We're going to help you get that information into Gateway. As it processes through the Gateway, as we move information through the process, we can see that the Form 3 and later the Form 4 will also be generated. Which takes us to, I can see that we're getting close on time, but that takes us to the last section here, and that is what happens after workshops. So, as we said before, coming to a workshop is a great way to get the process started. For the units that are requesting it, it's a great way to get information into the system, but budgeting very much is a 6-month window, is a dedicated 6-month window that includes responsibilities both online or in Gateway and responsibilities offline in terms of conducting the meetings, having those conversations to figure out what values you're going to consider. It's just important to note that attending a workshop is not the end of the process. When we consider what happens after workshops, there are 3 distinct timetables that we should talk about. The first one is what happens after the workshop, but before your public hearing. During that timetable, whether you attend a DLGF workshop or don't attend a workshop, there's a request that you would review the information on the current year financial worksheet. Your Form 1 is going to be split between an advertised and is going to be split between an advertised and an adopted column. We're going to ask that you review that advertised column on the Form 1. Form 2 of the miscellaneous revenue or the non-property tax revenue, let's make sure everything on that thing is up to date. And let's make sure that the Form 4B, the advertised portion, also is accurate. Now, what we're looking at is 3 of the forms listed here were created, could potentially be populated through the upload. But just to make sure that the information that we talked about at workshops, the information that is going to be advertised and adopted locally, matches what we know in real life, reviewing the upload to make sure that it has the right information is an extremely important step. The fifth bullet down, I should have put in red. Should have put a circle around it and arrows pointing to it from every direction. After we've reviewed each of the forms, the department would encourage every unit to run the error prevention report. What it's going to help to identify is anything that is out of the ordinary. It's not going to find every error. It's not flawless, but it will help to identify some of the more common issues that we have programmed error checks to find. Now, it is available in Gateway. You can run it as often as you like, but the department would definitely strongly encourage you to run that error prevention report before your public hearing. It's a chance for us to find any issues, to make any updates before we start moving forward with the budgeting process. Last bullet, and this one you will hear from every field rep that you'll hear a number of times throughout the year. A minimum of 10 days before whatever your public hearing is scheduled for, the Form 3 needs to be submitted. Just entering it into Gateway is not enough. Just having the department upload the Form 3 into Gateway is not enough. You actually need to submit it in Gateway to make sure that your advertisement for your public hearing is valid. The second time period that we should consider is what happens after the public hearing, but before the adoption meeting. This one's a little bit shorter. Now we're back on the Form 1. The first time we were here, we were doing the entry. The second time we were here, we were reviewing what we entered. And the third time we're here is focusing on the adopted column only. Let's make sure that information is consistent with any changes that were discussed at the public hearing. Those are the values that we want to move forward with through the budgeting cycle. We're also back to the Form 4B. There is some information on the adopted columns that we'll be looking at. Same idea. Any changes that were made after the public hearing, let's make sure though those are reflected in the adopted column of the Form 4B. And again, the should have put it in red, should have put arrows all around it. The department would recommend there's another opportunity to run your error prevention report. Before we adopt it, before we print anything out of the system, let's take a quick look to make sure that there aren't any significant issues that could potentially interrupt or lead to a rescheduling of the actual adoption meeting itself. Once the first 3 steps are done, you're in a position where you're ready to start to review and start to complete the Form 4 in the process. The Form 4 is the last form that we're going to do a deep dive into, or at least the department is going to talk about some best practices. If one of the more challenging conversations we have each year is that a fiscal body will receive a Form 4 that has a $0 budget, $0 levy, and a $0 tax rate. They'll sign their names to it and they will submit that to the department. And those will be the officially adopted budgets, levies, and rates that the department will be in a position to certify during the upcoming year. It seems like a joke, but each year there'll be a number of units that find themselves in this situation. So talking about best practices for the Form 4 is important. So before printing or presenting or signing the Form 4, the department would encourage you as a best practice to compare your Form 4 from this year to last year. If you start noticing that there are some pretty significant differences that you weren't expecting before moving forward, let's find out where those differences are coming from, or was there, let's find out where those differences are coming from. Right along those lines, confirming that the budgets, levies, and rates that appear on the Form 4 are consistent with the budgets, levies, and rates that have been advertised, that have been discussed, that have been expected to be certified by the department. There was a school corporation last year that accidentally adopted a budget in their education fund of 0. There were a number of townships that adopted a budget of 0 in their general fund. That is what they have signed their names to. That's what they have provided to the department. What we want to do is it's the last step after 6 months of work by both local government and the department. Let's make sure that the signature is the easy part to collect. But to do that, we should spend as much time validating what we're presenting on the Form 4 as we've done on the incremental sort of detail level that has gone on to every other form that has gone through the process. That last one doubles down on the first 2 points. Research any abnormal value. If that's not what you expected to see, let's find it, let's fix it, let's have the conversation before the fiscal body starts signing their names to the total. Okay, we're down to just the last handful of slides. We're right there in the home stretch. Almost got ahead of myself. All right, so once you've had your adoption meeting, once the Form 4 has been signed, important to get that form submitted to the department. So in this case, within 5 days of adoption, what we're looking at on the screen here is where in Gateway you will be submitting that signed version of the Form 4 to the department. Okay. So as you are working your way through the process, and I started to make a special emphasis on this when we were talking about the Form 3, Gateway is built with a visual, with a number of visual cues. What we're looking at here is the traditional accordion menu. This is what you see when you're looking at the budget forms in Gateway. Notice that beautiful yellow hue for each one of the lines. As you work your way through the process, not just entering the information, but actually submitting the forms, you will see the line colors start to change from that yellow color to the green one for most units. A way to sort of visually represent, have you not only done the hard work of compiling the information, refining the information, presenting the information, loading the information, but you've also done the easy part, actually getting submitted. This is the menu that you'll want to see in Gateway in 4 months. You're going to want to see green in almost all of these. There's a couple exceptions that we can talk about, that you can talk about with your field rep, but when we're done with the process, this is the sort of menu that you're going to be looking at. Okay, now we're down, just a handful of slides left. Now, even as early as May 19th, we can start looking at what resources are available to the units. On this page, we have a link to the user guides that are currently posted. You can see we've got about 20 of those relating to specific forms, relating to specific budget forms. We're looking at here is a step-by-step analysis of how to complete it, how to submit it. There's an intro on it that talks about what information is available. There's information about customizing it. These user guides are available. They're designed to sort of help you go through the process of submitting your information into Gateway. Another piece of information that we have is, like I said before, we're starting to build our presentation library, not just the slides that we're looking at here, but also recorded versions of the presentations that you can listen along to. We have covered a ton of information in very short order, but if you wanted to go back and review anything that had been covered, or present with your fiscal body, or to have your staff listen to these, listen to the sort of expectations that the department will have for what a workshop is. We've got similar presentations on Budget 101. That one really does get into some of the nuts and bolts of the forms, the concepts of a funded budget. It goes into while this one looked at workshops, that one takes the perspective of sort of the concepts behind the building a budget. There's a full presentation dedicated to how the department calculates our July estimates, or what estimates are available, how the form and formats of each of those reports. There's presentations on the additional appropriation, and there's a full presentation that was recorded by Ryan Burke on using the new format for the Form 4B, understanding what's on there, understanding the differences between how we used to present the information and how we're currently presenting it. The second link is where we are posting our current year webinars, and so if you're interested in learning more about circuit breakers, there is the audio recording for that presentation can be found at the second link. Jenny, as she said at the start of the presentation, will be sending out the slides and sending out links, but if you are looking for the place where we're posting the information, the second link on the page will take you directly to that. You can see that there are places for the department's webinars. We have got a YouTube training channel where we can find the user guides and informational icons. But if there is one thing and one resource that I put above all others that the department provides, it's the one in the middle of the page here. while I get to present at the webinars, while we get a chance to rub elbows at conferences, or where we will get a chance to rub elbows at conferences going forward, the best resource that the department provides on a day in and day out basis is the DLGF field staff. Collectively, we're looking at more than 200 years of budgeting experience. They have gone through this process with their eyes closed. They know this backwards and forwards. They can help to clarify any of the memos or any of the memos that you're receiving from the department. That is a fantastic resource for you to go for any and all questions. And while we can't provide legal or financial advice, there is a lot of things that we can do to help assist you, either in the preparation of budgets, in the calculations, or to discuss the procedures relating to them, effectively trying to empower you as much as possible to confidently go through an extremely complicated process. Okay, I am now 12 minutes over, and that is longer than I meant for it to be. I want to thank you all for your time and your attention. Hopefully this was beneficial, gives you an idea of what the department's expectations are, or what it means to attend a budget workshop. What I'm hoping is that this sort of kickstarts the unofficial start of the budgeting cycle, that this is an opportunity to reach out to your field representatives to start talking about when your workshops will be, how to sign up for those, what types of documentation needs to provide, what resources that they should start working on to put together your budget. Over the next few days, the next few weeks, we will definitely be in touch with you. But if you've got questions now relating to anything that you've heard today, would absolutely encourage you to reach out to your DLGF field representative. Okay. All right, that's my time. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate you attending the webinar today. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Fred. As Fred mentioned, we will leave the chat box open. So if you have any questions, you can submit those into the Q&A chat box. We will be addressing those in an FAQ document that we'll be doing and putting together with all of the questions from this morning and this afternoon. And if you are interested in CE credit, the PowerPoint or PDF document, the video, and the survey, that will all be sent out later this week and posted on the DLGF website on the webinar page, so you can check back on those. Otherwise, we will leave the Q&A chat box open for a few minutes to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.